Brit Marling, you created A Murder at the End of the World with your creative partner, Zal Batmanglij. You also directed a few episodes and you co-star as Lee Anderson, who's a former hacker, now married to a tech billionaire. So first off, what inspired you and Zal to write a mystery like this?
Well, I think part of it at the time was we were reading up on the whodunit as a genre. And one of the things that Zal brought to one of our writing sessions is he was like, the whodunit first came into popularity between the First and the Second World War, uh, which makes sense because that was another time that everyone was kind of looking around and being like, okay, like who did this? Like, how did we get to the place that we're in? And it felt very much like that's where we were and where we still are. So it felt like it was a good time for that genre to come back. And we'd been, talking to some friends who'd been on these retreats of some different tech billionaires and came back with some fascinating stories. And so those were the first seeds, a whodunit not happening in an English manner, but happening, on the private island or the strange resort of a technology billionaire, and finding out, what they were really up to in that space. And then of course it grew from there.
Did any of those stories that you heard sort of make their way into the series, like in any kind of oblique fashion?
No, not exactly in the sense that those stories all ended up being a little more mundane than you would think. But I think what we did take was this feeling of this sense of wonder of like getting an invitation from, somebody that you've heard of, but you wouldn't imagine would ever invite you someplace, and then showing up to an airport, and getting on a plane with a bunch of people you don't know and meeting them on this plane and then showing up at a location and sort of finding out what is in store for you. That it felt like there was something really rich in the idea of surrendering so much because of the, largesse of a billionaire and their assumed good intentions, and what it might, what might happen if it turned out to be the inverse.
The series also explores themes of technology, and its potential benefits and dangers. What made you want to explore those themes as part of this whodunit?
Well, I guess that's our life now, right? I mean, we're talking on Zoom rather than in person. I am a filmmaker really only because I came of age in the time that you could make films on your laptop with Final Cut Pro and a prosumer camera, and you could make those films for very cheap and they could find their way to festivals. So there's of course a lot about the way technology has entered all of our lives that's beautiful and generative and creative. And then of course, there are also things about it that I think, we're all taking a bit of a pause right now and asking what it means for AI, or a computer to a statistical algorithm to be writing our narratives. What does that mean when it's drawing from a database of narratives that have preceded, this moment, and how that database of narratives contains all the things from our past that we might like to move away from, the misogyny, the racism, the homophobia, and what does it mean to maybe surrender so much of our stories and the way we think and sort of feel about things to technology sort of worming its way into ever more intimate corridors of our minds and hearts. I still have a lot of questions about it. Even after making a series about it, I still have questions.
And when creating characters with a lot of technical knowledge, hackers and people in the tech industry, how much research and know-how does it require on your part as writers?
We went to great lengths we decided we were going to have every hack in the story be real. And so we went to great lengths and we worked with a hacker, and everything you see on screen is accurate. Everything has been done. When they do the hack with the toy the Mattel toy I Am Me, which is like a sort of little computer device that kids play text on, you can actually hack that device, hook it up to your computer and run a program through it that will crunch through garage door codes and can open, the code of a garage door. So everything you see on screen, and the smart bulb, you can also hack a smart bulb and lift somebody's password off of there for their network. So all those things are real. And we went to great lengths with our production design team and also with Emma, the actor who's doing most of the hacks to really make sure that everything we filmed was correct. And I think that's a delicious part of it. None of it is fake.
And the central character is Darby Hart, played by Emma Corrin. She's the hacker, a sleuth, daughter of a coroner. She's had this unique upbringing. How did you conceive of that character?
One of the first things that came to us actually when we wanted to write a young woman as a detective, and we thought, okay, if you make a woman in her 50s a detective and you give her a badge and a gun, like nobody's going to bat an eyelash at that. We're all okay with that at this point. But what happens if you take the woman that's the age and gender of the victim, and you don't give her a badge and you don't give her a gun, and you're going to send her and solve something? Like, how do you make that feel credible and not like, sort of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Nancy Drew style farce, basically. And I think the thing that came to us first about it was just the idea of like, well, she could have authority if she was a coroner's daughter, and if she'd grown up on crime scenes, and if she'd, spent time around death very early, and it had given her a kind of gravitas and a courage, and a willingness to face the dark in things. And then of course also the internet, I mean, she's logged her 10,000 hours in amateur sleuthing, chat forums online before she's even in her 20s. So I think those two things together kind of created a cocktail in which you could create this kind of heroine and believe in her, which I'm not sure would have been as easy to do even 10 years ago.
And when you cast an actor in a role like Emma as Darby, does that change the way you see the character from when you were writing it? Like, do they bring something to the role that you weren't necessarily expecting?
Oh, always. Yeah. I mean, I think Darby was a very vivid role, and maybe more than anything else that I've been a part of writing. I think I felt a little afraid that we'd written something so specific, and so, when people read the scripts, they would always say like, oh, Darby's so iconic, and that felt intimidating. It was like, okay, how do we find somebody to fill these shoes that seem so vivid to people, even just on the page? But when I met Emma for the first time, I just felt like, oh, they've got this. And I had felt watching their work as Diana that they really have a way of coming at characters from the inside out rather than the outside in. I think Emma really brought that to Darby, like found those core childhood memories that make Darby operate in a certain way. And so it felt like Darby just came to life, and it felt like a huge part of that was maybe Emma's background in child psychology too, and just understanding what needed to be created to make this person tick authentically. And then there are a lot of delicious surprises too. I think Emma has a goodness and a beautiful goodness and sweetness that I think Emma brought to Darby, a lightness, that made some of the darker parts of the story more palatable, because you believe that someone like Emma is on a journey toward the light, and that, in playing Darby, Darby will take you there, so yeah, it was very, very, very lucky meeting those. Emma as a person and Darby as a character, I think, was a bit of a date with destiny.
And this is actually your narrative directing debut. What made you want to go behind the camera for this series?
I guess in many times when we were making the OA at Netflix, I had wanted to direct, but in writing, being the lead writer and showrunner, and in every scene practically, there just wasn't the space to make these sci-fi narratives on the budget and timetable we had to do them under, and do all of those jobs at once. So I think when we went to write this, I was just like, okay, I would love acting and I want to keep acting, but to give myself the space I want to direct and to do it, sometimes we're doing 11 pages, big scenes in one day. Like, I've got to just be focused on the directing part to pull that off at the level we demand of ourselves, which I think is pretty high. And so for me, it was just like a natural choice to do a supporting role and really throw myself into the directing on this. Now that I've done it, who knows? Maybe I'm crazy enough to try to do both. But we'll see, you know.
And the character of Lee, was that a character that you always knew that you were going to play? Was that something that you had written for yourself as a way into this material?
Yeah, I did always know I was going to play her. I had a moment where I just thought, oh, this is too much to do. You know, somebody else can do this part equal justice or do it better. Um, but there is something that I really wanted to, I think I wanted to play about Lee to get to the bottom of. Like sometimes I think the characters I write for myself are things that I am not fully willing to explore without having a character as a vehicle to do it. In Sound of My Voice, I loved playing Maggie because Maggie gave herself permission to be cruel, like really cruel and ruthless in ways that I, as a real person in real life, have a hard time, you know, accessing that kind of like eviscerating, you know, like one-liners to somebody. And I think with Lee, there was something I wanted to, was really interested in about like what happens when there's still something flinty inside you, but you've made a lot of compromises in how you've lived your life, and you're finding yourself in a life that isn't your own. It's not the one you thought you'd author as a kid when you were more in touch with who you felt you wanted to be. And I wanted to go on that journey with Lee and see how she got herself out. Um, I think Lee feels she's living a stranger's life, and she doesn't know how she got there. And in the end, meeting her mentee, you know, Darby is somebody who grew up admiring Lee's work. And I think we very rarely see female mentorship on screen. I thought it would be really exciting to see an older woman and a younger woman together, you know, each giving the other something that they need in order to mature or evolve. And that sometimes those gifts come from interacting with younger people who are still in touch with something that you have at the beginning of your life that you can lose later.
And how different is it as an actor, those times when you're directing yourself?
So different. Uh, you know, I tried to choose directing the chapters that I was in the least, but then I ended up directing chapter 6, which as Lee, I am in the most. And I had to just show up on set that day and be like, okay, I surrender. You know, I've got my shot list, I have my storyboards, you know, this is a lot of material to do in a very short amount of time, but like, here we go. And I really, you know, after checking behind the monitor to make sure the frame was right or that I was roughly on track, I would really let go and just be like, I could feel as a performer when I had done something honest. And I would be like, okay, like take 4, we got that. We're moving on. Like, I don't need to go behind the monitor and check. Like, I felt it there and it was the truth. And then also, I was very fortunate in that Charlotta Bruce Christensen, um, our DP, who's an incredible person, was somebody I really trusted, you know, and we could just look at each other from across the set and we would both know when we'd gotten it and it was time to move on. So yeah.
And among the other episodes that you directed the first episode. What was it like setting the tone for the show in that way? Was there a lot of pressure to kind of, create that, that tone and set it for the rest of the show, or did you always kind of know what you wanted?
I mean, there definitely is pressure in doing the first chapter because you want to get it right because everything that comes next is inheriting that world that you have built. But I think one of the things about stepping into the director chair for me was that I had always written in a very cinematic style. Like I had always written, the sentences were always telling you inside them where the camera is, and not by being literally like, this is a wide shot and now we're in the close. It's more like it was always directing your eye. So it was nice to finally kind of just close the gap on that and literally be able to storyboard everything as I had seen it when I was writing it. And then the other great gift is like, as a director, you know, you create a pretty specific rule book, or at least I do. You know, it's like, this is the color palette for Iceland, you know, and this is the color palette for the past on the road trip. And, you know, these are the references and images, and these colors are forbidden. And you kind of create this rule book, but then you ultimately, you got to really trust your collaborators. And I've had such amazing collaborators: Alex DiGirolando, the production designer; Megan Gray, the costume designer; Charlotta, who's the DP, Dylan Titchener, who edited. You know, like you lean into those relationships. And once you've set up what the parameters are and you can get people to see what you're seeing, so many of the beautiful gifts come from what they give you back. So I think a huge part of directing is also about like leaning into that collaboration once you've set the tone and inviting people to do their best work, inspiring them to do their best work.
And would you ever want to revisit the character of Darby at some point in the future, or do you feel like you've told a complete story?
I mean, we definitely thought of this as a novel with a clear beginning, middle, and end that would satisfy the viewer. But, you know, that mystery is closed. But Darby herself as a person is not closed and is clearly a woman of many mysteries. So, you know, if the right set of circumstances came together, I could see us bringing Darby somewhere else in the world, maybe murder at the other end of the world, and probably not in Iceland. If I was doing it again, I'd probably shoot in the Maldives or the south of France. You know, mystery in the south of France sounds nice. Yeah, but we'll see.
Congratulations on the show. Thank you so much for talking to me about it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate the time.